Hello and welcome to SweetSpotDFS. This is a DFS review video for the 2021 Masters Tournament. Now, before I get into this review, I want to remind you guys there are timestamps in the description below. Also on YouTube, if you hover over the progress bar, it's cut up into segments. The timestamps are also there. So you can use either option to get you to those places you want to go. Now, if you haven't seen a review video before, basically I go over my process leading up to the week to see what I did right and what I did wrong. I also will have a little bit of a recap of what my Masters viewing experience was like. So again, timestamps are in the description below. Let's go ahead and get into this. We're going to talk about the results first, obviously. Hideki Matsuyama is your winner. He really took advantage of Saturday's weather delay. Once it came back, he still had 9.5 holes left to play, and he took advantage. I think he was 7 under through those 9 holes, 9.5 holes. And I mean, there were a lot of other golfers that could have taken advantage. I mean, Justin Thomas was going pretty low on Saturday's round, and then ended up having a triple bogey on hole 13 that really derailed his chances, and then he just really didn't recover after that. So that's why you don't see him inside the top 10. For Matsuyama, though, he took advantage of it. I mean, Justin Rose was up there too after he was leading Thursday and Friday's round, and he didn't take advantage of the weather. So it's not like the weather was very advantageous to all, but it definitely gave those who were still on the golf course a little bit of an easier track to shooting lower scores. And again, Hideki Matsuyama definitely took advantage of that. He was 11 under after Saturday's round. The next nearest competitor was 7 under. So really, it was all about kind of making sure you don't score huge numbers. And basically what that made everyone else in the field do had to catch up to him. And Xander Schauffele almost did that. But unfortunately, he found the drink on hole 16, made a double or a triple. I think it was a triple, which really pulled him back. But he was, after hole 15, within 2 shots of the lead. So unfortunately, going in the water on 16 kind of ended Xander's hopes. But man, I couldn't be happy. I shouldn't say happier, but I'm really happy that Hideki Matsuyama won. He wasn't a golfer I was on. I mean, if you watch the preview or the strategy video, he was not a golfer I was showcasing or really talking much about. And a lot of that was because I cared a little too much about recent form heading into this tournament. And one thing that I'm pulling away from this whole experience is that it doesn't really matter what your recent form is coming into this tournament. The Masters, I even heard this on air, and I think I've probably heard this around the industry. The Masters is a great place where it doesn't matter what form you have coming into it. If you've played this course well in the past, you have a much better chance of doing well at this tournament. And it's proven that way. I mean, you look at some of these guys that are at the top of the leaderboard. You know, Jordan Spieth, he is actually a golfer who's had really good recent form before heading into this tournament. And obviously he does well at this tournament. So it was just a really good mix of things for him to do well at this tournament. Xander Schauffele, I would say he had middling recent form. Like, it wasn't as good as we've seen. He had a missed cut at the Players' Championship and a disappointing finish at the WGC Workday Championship. You know, 2 premier events basically of where most of the best golfers go to play. He didn't do that well at either of those tournaments. Mark Leishman had not been playing well. Neither had been Justin Rose. So like 4 of these guys inside the top 7, I don't think anyone really, not 4, I'm sorry. I would say it was probably these 2 and Matsuyama. Those guys really weren't coming in with the greatest of form. And the fact is, when we get into the optimal lineup, you will see that you definitely need to, well, I'll wait until we get there, but chances are you're going to see them in the optimal lineup. But yeah, it was one of those interesting things for me, and I think that's all I really have to say. I'm glad Hideki won. He'd been on tour for what seems like forever, but he's only 29 years old and finally won. You heard it from the broadcast. You know, he had the pressure of a nation on his shoulders, whatever. Like I think there's some truth behind that, but I think it was more overblown than anything. Still, it's awesome that, you know, Hideki's the first Japanese golfer to win a major championship. That's really cool. That adds to the lore and the mystique of this tournament, which we all want drama. We all want storylines in all of our sporting events. Well, Matsuyama had his own, and it was really cool to see him win. Especially, I think, when maybe some of our favorite golfers who we were kind of rooting for weren't up there. For me, it was Rory. I wouldn't have minded if Xander won. That'd have been awesome. Or even if Spieth came back and won. Like, obviously, I think a lot of people are pulling for that. I'm not a huge Spieth fan to begin with, but I think just seeing how poorly he had been doing for the last couple of years, and then him finally getting things figured out, I was kind of pulling for him. And Zalatoris, like, obviously, this kid is going to be so good for years to come, as long as, you know, he doesn't have any injury-related things or personal life things that kind of get him out of golf. He is definitely a special kid, a special guy, you know, to look forward to. Again, he doesn't have he's not a PGA Tour member. He's a Korn Ferry Tour member. And he got into this tournament from his top 6 finish at the US Open. So it's not like he had been playing so good that's why he was invited into the tournament. He got here because of his US Open exemption, finishing as well as he did there. And then we can talk more about the other guys as we go through, but yeah, to me it was a great Masters. I loved it. It was full of drama. I thought it was great. So let's move on. The next thing that I want to get into is the optimal lineup versus the Millie Maker lineup. I did enter the Millie Maker. I had two tickets that I qualified to play in, so I didn't really have to spend my own money on it. I'm going to go ahead and hide these alternate events. If you want to, I mean, there's nobody inside the top 20 that placed in any of these, but if you want to, you know, take a look, obviously, I want to let you guys know what I'm doing before I do it. The Millie Maker lineup are golfers that are in this blue highlighted color. So you can see he had 5 golfers inside the top 10. Now, if you're with me during preview and strategy videos, you know that I analyze the top 10 of every single year and come up with the bucket system. And based off that bucket system, I'm trying to find you the best plays to choose from. Obviously, I say you want to find at least 5 of your golfers inside the top 10, if not all 6. Like, I'm always trying to find all 6 inside my, you know, when I build my lineups, I want all 6 of my golfers there. And obviously there's different makeups that come with that, but this guy had 5, so really good. Start out, you know, that is solid. His 6th golfer is down here in Paul Casey. Paul Casey finished 26th place and scored 69 DraftKings points. But he had Matsuyama, Zalatoris, Schauffele, Spieth, and Connors, which was amazing. One thing I want to note is, I suppose we can bring this up right now. When we talk about salaries, where we want to start our lineups with and where we want to build lineups into, if you recall during the preview video, I had said more than likely, because I also review all the optimal lineups, and as I go back and look, like if we look at 2019's optimal lineup, we had a 10K guy, a 9K, an 8K, 7, 7, 6. And that was essentially my thought process the entire time, because we have seen this makeup of an optimal lineup here at the Masters, I think in 75% of our tournaments. So it was definitely something that I was trying to hound to you guys during the preview video. Now, if we go back to the 2020 or 2021, I'm sorry, and we look, you know, 10K, 9K, 8K, 7K, 6K, and he had a 7. So he had the 10, 9, 8, 7, 7, 6. So that hit. That was first step when we were looking at lineups. Now, this wasn't the optimal lineup, but it was pretty darn close. It scored 571.5 points, and it used up 49,600 of the salary. The optimal lineup scored 49,100 points, or I'm sorry, the optimal lineup used 49,100 dollars of the 50,000 salary cap you have, and it scored 589. So it scored 17 more points, 16 and a half more points than the Millie Maker lineup. And really, it was the same 5 golfers, Corey Connors, Spieth, Schauffele, Zalatoris, and Matsuyama, and it replaced Paul Casey with Justin Rose. Justin Rose was in the optimal lineup, but it still did that 10, 9, 8, 7, 7, 6 lineup. Now, I did try to look at different makeups because I usually like to do a realistic lineup that gets closer to $50,000. But I'm here to tell you there really wasn't a way to do that. So, you can see the top 6 guys, if I sort DK points from top to bottom, are, the golfers I actually went through, the optimal lineup. But if we were to like separate, say, Justin Rose and instead put in Mark Leishman, what ends up happening is now we go further down in salary. So we're only using $48,800. When I create a realistic lineup, I'm trying to find something closer to $50,000. And I'm here to tell you there's no way to do that. It's either the Millie Maker winning lineup. That is the next closest lineup that you could do. But if we try to sub anything else out, because it goes, $69.72, we do have $900 to work with, meaning we could either replace Justin Rose with an $8,100 golfer, or we could replace Corey Connors with a $7,700 golfer. Well, as we look at the rest of the leaderboard, for DraftKings points, I want you to see if you can find anyone 8,100 or lower. Let's put it this way. It has to be somewhere between 77 and 8,100. That's the only way we can really do this. I mean, we could cut down to like 7,600. That would be fine. But as you can see, we see nobody. Sure, we have Sebastian Munoz, that's 6,600. Palmer, 65. McIntyre, 65. And obviously Leishman at 6,900. Cam Smith, super close to that price tag that would make things work out to get to a more realistic lineup, but it isn't. It's either Casey or Leishman. That's it. So we can't even get a realistic lineup. The realistic lineup is the Millie Maker winning lineup. So kudos to that guy. I can't remember his name. It was like Mr. McGiblets or something like that. I can't remember. Some funny, weird name. But that's the closest realistic lineup that we could get to, is leaving $400 on the table. So we couldn't do better than the Millie Maker unless we were to select the optimal and leave a ton of money off the table, which $900 isn't a lot in this limited field, but it's really difficult to do that. Now, I would say this, the optimizer does leave money on the table, and I'm hoping the guys that I did give the optimizer to had some success. There were a lot of ways that you could use that optimizer. What I ended up doing was I went heavy on Rory McIlroy. So 34% of my lineups, unfortunately, had Rory in it. And I basically locked in Rory in that optimizer, and then it just chose everybody else. But it chose Corey Connors. It chose Jordan Spieth. It really didn't choose Hideki Matsuyama. And again, that was because of the recent form thing that I was talking about. My optimizer does look at, or I shouldn't say my optimizer, the metric that I use for my optimizer to run against is heavily weighted on recent form. I shouldn't say heavily, but it is. Obviously, there's a weight in it that looks for recent form and how well people have done. So, unfortunately, I didn't have those guys, but the optimizer would have gotten on the guys. I was always looking for two 7K golfers to go with a 10 and a 9, and I didn't really so much care about an 8. Like I said, I started a lot of lineups with Rory, but I started a lot of my lineups with a 10K golfer and then went on from there. But yeah, I thought we could have gotten there easy. Honestly, the bucket system could have gotten you there really easily. And that's where I kind of want to go to next, is let's take a look at the bucket system. Now, I do have it by the summary, and here are some things I want to do on camera. I kind of went through this before coming here. I'm going to leave everything up. I know it's difficult to see, but you can see what the bucket is over in column A, and you can see which bucket it is and what the rank is. So when we're looking at last year 1s, last year 3s, last year 2s, let me just highlight those, I guess. When we're looking at these 3 buckets, we have a minimum of 2 for last year 1, a minimum of 3 for a last year 3, and a minimum of 1 for a last year 2. So if we go to the 2021 DK page and only look at golfers inside the top 10, because again, that's what the bucket system does. We're only looking at top 10 golfers. We want to be looking for, I already lost what I thought. So 2 last year 1s, 1 last year 2, 1 last year 3. Can we find that? So last year 1, we have 2. 1 last year 2, and 1 last year 3. We actually have 2 last year 3s. So the minimum worked there. You know, that is the least amount of times we've seen it dating back to 2013. Well, it still holds up to today. So obviously the last year bucket, boom, check. Bucket system would have gotten you there. If you would have started your lineups this way, perhaps you got on those golfers. And for me personally, it's really, you kind of have to pick some of these golfers yourself. So if you do pick like a Hideki Matsuyama, so if we look at Hideki, he was a last year 1. So he obviously fits that bucket. If I go ahead and lock him in to my optimizer, it's going to build around Hideki and it's going to look for all the other buckets. Chances are we probably could get to Will Zalatoris. Look at his value, 1.213. That's how many DraftKings points he scored divided by his salary. If it's over 1, that means that's tremendous value. He was 19th in my model, which I think is a fair number. It's not terrible. I didn't have an issue with Will Zalatoris, but my optimizer liked golfers around him, like Abraham Ancer at 74, Joaquin Niemann at 74. It did like Paul Casey too at 77. So it really didn't get to Rose. It really didn't get to Zalatoris, but it still held its own. It was pretty decent. Let's go ahead and go back to the buckets. The next one we want to look at is the last week buckets. And really all we have for last week is 5 for last year 1s. 5, a minimum of 5. I think if you saw that, you probably saw there were at least 5. 4, 5, 6. We had 6 last week 1s. So that minimum, boom, check that off the list. So far for the bucket system, 2 for 2. Go back to the summary page. We come down to the course history. We had a minimum of 2 course history 2s, a minimum of 3 course history 1s, and a minimum of 2 course history 3s. Now that equals up to be greater than 6. And so you have to choose, you know, do you want 2 of each? Maybe you want 1 of 1, grab 3 of the course history 1s. Let's see if that actually pulled off. So 1 course history 1, 2, 3 course history 1, barely. Cameron Smith barely snuck in there. So 3 course history 1s. I think we only wanted 2, I believe. Let me double check on that. Oh no, we wanted 3. 3 course history 1s. So 3, boom, check that off the list. That works. Now we want 2 of each course history 2 and course history 3. Well, there are my 2 2s. I mean, we had 4 2s to begin with, and then we have 3 3s. So with all of that, like that checks off the list. Course history, got that covered. Now let's check recent form. Recent form, buckets 1, 2, and 3. So 1 and 2, we want 2. 3, we want 1. Now this would tie it all in together. Let's see how well it does. We have 2 recent form bucket 1s. Were we supposed to get 3? I already forgot off the top of my head. Nope, we just wanted 2. So boom, 2 checks off. We have 2 recent form bucket 2s and 2 recent form bucket 3s. So that also, I mean, we had another 2 and another 3. So there we go. All of those things check the box. As you can see, we barely see any 5s in any of this. I mean, we only see 1 5. For all of the scores within the top 10 for bucket scores, we see 1 5, and that was Jordan Spieth being a last year 5. Didn't really, you know, put any damper on me. And again, when we look at the buckets and me telling you what your minimums that you should be playing, it only accounted for 4 positions out of 6. You know, obviously, FanDuel and DraftKings, you pick 6 golfers. The minimums that I have for you for last year buckets is just 4. You want to play 2 last year 1s, 1 last year 2, 1 last year 3. That way, the other 2 you can select on anyone. And obviously, you could select Jordan Spieth, who is a last year 5. So the buckets, course history, recent form, last year, last week, all check off the list. Like they all worked perfectly. The next piece of information that I think that really ties it in well is using the strokes gain buckets. Now, I don't have enough data to go back to kind of do the same strokes gained buckets or the same type of bucket system as the other 4 buckets we talked about. So for strokes gained, I merely go by off the tee and putting stats. I start with everything positive. So if you have positive off the tee, positive putting, plus positive approach and positive around the green, you fell under the strokes gained bucket 1. Now, I've covered this in my previews and strokes gained or strategy videos. I'm not going to continue going through, but you can obviously see what the title of each of these buckets are by reading them up here. And I do have rules here next to their name and ID. Pick 1 to 3, pick 1 to 3, pick 1 to 3. If we look, we can easily do that. So Will Zalatoris, Xander Schauffele, they were in our optimal lineup. You can see they were part of strokes gained bucket 1. Corey Connors was our strokes gained bucket 2. Hideki Matsuyama is our strokes gained bucket 3. Strokes gained bucket 4 was Jordan Spieth and I think Justin Rose, right? Justin Rose wasn't in the optimal lineup. He was in the next. Oh, he was in the optimal lineup. Never mind. So it was Rose, Spieth. Okay. So yes, Justin Rose. So it was 0 to 2 strokes gained bucket 4 golfers. 1 to 3 strokes gained bucket 3 golfers. So there's 3 golfers right there. 1 to 3 strokes gained bucket 2. There's Corey Connors. And 1 to 3 strokes gained bucket 1s. And that's Will Zalatoris and Xander Schauffele. So if I had a graphic that I could put on the board, it would be check, 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 check for all of the buckets in the bucket system. It worked marvelously this week. Again, I mean, so how does the bucket system work when how do we get the correct lineups? You still have to select where you want to start from. Sure, if we use the optimizer and we go, okay, I want to put, let me just bring mine up. I'm sorry. I should have had this ready, but it won't take long to load. Let's say, we want to start with a golfer. It doesn't matter who, but say he fits one of these buckets. Let's say Xander Schauffele. We want to start all of our lineups around. It's actually taking longer to load than I thought. There we go. So let me go throw the optimizer over here. So again, like I was saying, if I wanted to start with Xander Schauffele, let's lock him in and make sure the optimizer selects Xander Schauffele. When I come down here and I select all of my buckets, and hopefully for you guys out there that actually use this, it works to your advantage. But if I wanted to select all these buckets and say I want to put all the mins in that I saw, so again, it was 2, 1, 1. If we get to last week 1, what was that again? I think it was 2, 2, 1. Let me just look at this and then put them all over here. So last week we had just 5 for last week 1. So sure, I'll put 5 just for the hell of it. Course history 2, 3, 2. Obviously we can't do that, so I'm gonna go. Let's go 2, 1, 1. I don't want to. I want the optimizer to be able to select it pretty freely, and I'm gonna put 1s for the maximum of the other ones, like the other course history 4, 5, and 6. Then recent form 1, 2, 3. So 1 and 2 were 2s. So let me go ahead and put those up. And then 3 was 1. And course history, no, strokes gained 1, 1, 1. Okay, so I updated them right here. You can see I have everything here. Now, everything is based off of ownership, so it's probably not going to work out as well as I want here. Let's do this. You know what? I don't need these ownerships here. It's not going to matter. So what I'm going to do is put 100% maximum ownership for everyone. And that way the optimizer is just going to select the best lineup with Xander Schauffele. And we'll see what ends up happening. This again is using all the buckets, all the presets that I put. So if I run this, let's see what it spits out. Again, I locked in Xander, so we'll see where it goes from here. See if we can get to the optimal lineup. So I went from Xander to Patrick Cantlay, Sergio, Scott, and Palmer. Obviously, Palmer was a good value. He's probably one of the best values in the 6K range. But let's go ahead, go to the 6K range, and lock in Corey Connors. What kind of stinks about this is, unless I do have ownership, I can't really run this optimizer to select. Yeah, so I think this is going to be an issue. If I don't go by ownership, it's whenever I hit this run optimizer, it's just not going to select golfers that are decent. Like it's just, it can't figure out everything. Minimum ownership, that's what's screwing things up. That's probably what was actually driving the optimizer to select Patrick Cantlay so many times, because he was under the maximum ownership or the minimum ownership. So if I do this, run this, let's see. So Sung Jae, Daniel Berger, Sergio, Paul, Casey. So it's not really going to get there. Maybe if I do this and select Hideki as well. The issue is I'm going to have to lock some of these guys in, because like I was saying, the optimizer is always going to select the optimal lineup based off of my metrics. Oh, we got really close. Xander, Matsuyama. Too bad Scott was there, but it chose Will Zalatoris and Corey Connors. That's not terrible. How about this? 1, 1, 1, 2, 1. There we go. Now it's forced to select a 10, a 9, an 8, 7, 6. Or 2 7s and a 6. So it chose Brooks instead of Jordan Spieth and then Adam Scott. So it was close. Like it selected 49,300. Shoot. I want to keep all my lineups here. I should have actually thought about doing this. So why it's selecting this and kind of what I was talking about before is this shines when my maximum ownership, the maximum ownership that I set is kind of set to a strict number, because it will select one and then it'll go to the next one. I can't get that to do that right now because I have so many lineups loaded in. I have 168 lineups loaded in my lineups page, and the optimizer is looking at the maximum ownership. I can't get to an ownership that'll make this select different golfers. So I don't want to sit here and say, okay, let me select Jordan Spieth also. Let's see what will be selected. So now I'm locking in 4 golfers, and more than likely the optimizer isn't going to get there. Yeah, so it's selecting Adam Scott and Joaquin Niemann instead of the other 2 7K golfers. But either way, I'm very confident that it would have went from Ryan Palmer, because that's the 6K value that was the best that I had. It would have went from him, and it would have selected Adam Scott, Joaquin Niemann. It probably would have gotten to Abraham Answer, if I'm being completely honest. And I'm wasting time right now trying to explain this to you guys when it's really, it doesn't really matter. But if I put all of these conditions in, I guarantee you we would get to the optimal lineup sooner rather than later. And that's all I'm trying to get at with this, is with the bucket system, it will do that if you put in those strict of commands, basically. Now, I will say this. I love that it worked. And like I said in the strategy video and the preview video, I love the Masters with the bucket system. It almost works 100% every single time that I do it, primarily because it's a limited field and the cream rises to the top. So when the bucket system is analyzed, or when I analyze the top 10, throw those into these buckets, which that's what the buckets are, the analysis of top 10s, looking at recent form, last year finish, last week finish, and course history, it tends to select the right golfers. Now, again, I'm beating a dead horse here, but I went too much on Rory, so I was never going to get there. But I kind of had said this in the strategy video. I said somebody, let me open this back up. And actually go by game number. I said somebody out of this group, right here, Xander Schauffele, Jon Rahm, Rory McIlroy, was going to win this tournament. I was close. We had a 3rd and a 5th place finish. Rory was my guy. Out of all of these guys, who do you think I owned the least amount of times? If you guess Xander, you're correct. And that's unfortunate. What I should have done is just own them equally all together. And these 3 golfers should have been my anchors for all of my lineups. So 33% of my lineups should have been Xander, 33 should have been Jon Rahm, and 33 should have been Rory. Or at the very least, how I like to do lineups is 30, 30, 30, 10. So 10 is just FOMO lineups that can be whatever. The other 30 I should have anchored around these guys. I really should have done that. I'm sure, like most of you guys, I got too concerned with, you know, skipping out on certain golfers like Justin Thomas or Dustin Johnson. I didn't want to miss out on those guys, and I didn't want them just to be in my 10% lineups. You know, like of the 10%, I have to divvy up that ownership between those golfers I just named. So having like 2% of Justin Thomas wouldn't have made me feel comfortable. Instead, I went with 15%. And of these 3 golfers that I had to kind of take ownership down, so that came from Xander. On total, I had Xander in 10% of my lineup. So I basically took 20% and gave it to Dustin Johnson, Bryson DeChambeau, and Justin Thomas. I only own Rahm at 24% of my lineups, so his 6% also went to those guys. And obviously that left with Rory. I played him in 34% of my lineup. So I picked the wrong guy. And a lot of that just came to an emotional decision, basically. Like, I say that, but it was like there's no logic behind it. It was just a feel play. The other 2 golfers were, you know, less of a question mark. Like Rory was coming in with swing issues and stuff like that. I should have known better. And right now I'm putting Rory in a timeout. So the next tournament that I like him in, I'm going to dial back my ownership. Regardless of how much I like him. He's not been making very good decisions. I don't trust him. But either way, had I gone with that, thinking somebody from this group was going to win the tournament, why not have equal ownership and then just fill in the rest with whomever? It's unfortunate. Like, if I, just to prove to you a little bit more, these golfers here were your morning golfers, basically. And these were your afternoon guys. Sorry, right here. These were your afternoon golfers. So I was going to select, you know, McIlroy, Rahm, or Schauffele and pair them up with any of these guys. Had I done that, I mean, I knew I liked Jordan Spieth. Had I just done this, you know how much money I would have won just by starting with those 2 guys? I didn't really get to much Patrick Cantlay. I think the optimizers select him 9% of the time. Morikawa I didn't like, 8%. Patrick Reed 4%. Let's see, where did I have Matsuyama? Oh, I did. No, I owned Matsuyama in 6%. I think I said to somebody I owned him in 9% of my lineups. I just flipped the 6 upside down and made it a 9. But yeah, 6%. Obviously, with the winner of the tournament only in 6% of your laps, you're not making a lot of money. I didn't lose a lot. I think I put in 75 and came away with 60. So not terrible, but I was hoping to do better. That's what happens when you put Rory as your main guy. Okay. Let's go over one more thing. I don't want to spend too much time. I think we've gone pretty long already. 33 minutes, not bad. We can review the SweetSpot score. So this is what the optimizer runs by. It goes by a score. This rank here is based off that score. So obviously the better the rank, closer to 1, the higher the score that this golfer ended up getting. And you can see Jon Rahm was at the top. Usually what I want to see is more top 10s in this than missed cuts. And I have 3, 4, 5, 6 guys inside the top 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 missed cuts. So it did work out. The SweetSpot score did work out better than it didn't, I guess. The better way to say that. I have 3 golfers in the optimal lineup. And the 4th and 5th guys aren't too far off. So Matsuyama was 25th in my model, and Corey Connors was 27th. I believe Ryan Palmer, like I was saying, was just ahead of him. So Palmer at 6,500 was better than Corey Connors in the 6K range. Just barely though. 5 rankings, I guess. 5 ranking points. I don't know exactly what the score was, difference between those guys, but yeah, not terrible. And Will Zalatoris, so I was telling you this, you know, it was going to select Abraham Answer before it was going to select Zalatoris, but yeah, I don't know why Scott would have, why was Scott picked? I don't get it. When we were running through the optimizer, it doesn't make any sense to me. I wonder if I were to do this. I kind of want to, I don't want to spend too much time here, but let's, if I go ahead and take that away and put in Zalatoris and take Corey Connors away, I want to see. I just don't want to obviously put the answers on the board and have the optimizer run and, you know, figure it out. I just want to see if I can get a core of 3 golfers to figure out if the optimizer would select the right guys. Nah, Colin Morikawa, that's no good. Yeah, I liked Kokrak, but that wasn't gonna do it. I wonder if I select 5 of these guys, if the optimizer will select the right one, the optimal lineup. So Simpson, Scott, okay. How about we go with Rose? So now it won't select a 7K golfer. It probably is going to still select like Morikawa. Yeah, so it went with Morikawa, which, let's see, what was his 859, 898. So this is what the optimizer, this is, I'm gonna have to figure this out because Spieth has a higher score. And really Brooks has a higher score than Spieth, but just barely. Yeah, so I think I was saying this in my optimizer video that I sent out to everyone that I send the optimizer to. It goes by, if I were to do this and say I sort by the metric and go largest to smallest, run the optimizer again, it's probably going to select Brooks because he's actually above Jordan, but it should select Jordan. Let's see here. So it still went with Morikawa. I don't get it. I don't get it. It's definitely something I'm going to have to figure out. So unfortunately, the optimizer just wasn't going to get there. I don't get it. Oh, I understand why. Jordan Spieth was a last week 2. He's not a last week 1, and we're telling the optimizer to select at least 5 last week 1s. So all of the conditionals that I put in, sure they work, but that wasn't the optimal lineup, and that's something I forgot to mention. Maybe you guys already spotted it, and maybe I'm going too quickly. But if I were to go ahead, sort this from top to bottom, we look at everyone that's inside the optimal lineup. It's a 4 for last week. Like, we don't have 5 last week 1s. That's the big thing here. We only have 3. So we can't go by, you know, the minimum. So if we go back to the summary, we can't go by this right here. Sure, minimum 5. Yeah, we see that 5 was inside the top 10. And this is what the issue comes with using the min and max as your rules. I don't really necessarily like to do that. If I notice, I mean, it's better to put your maxes at those numbers, not your mins. So, I mean, you know, if we only selected 2, say we definitely want 2, and there wasn't anything for last week 1, so we don't have to worry about that, and say I want 1, you know, basically doing this optimizer, I know never to put 2 or more, but having 1s is fine. And I guess if something is as high as what we saw, having 2 wouldn't be terrible either. So for last week 1s, you know, when we look at the bucket system, again, it says for last week 1s we want at least 5. But if we put 2, that's fine. And if the optimizer ends up selecting 5 or more, we're going to be okay with that. That's fine. How many of you guys are lost? with me going over this? Let me know in the comments. I want to know if this kind of stuff kind of makes it loses your interest. Because a little bit I'm rambling, not really rambling, but I'm going over this in real time with you guys, and it might be a waste of time, so I want to know. Anyways, moving on. The next thing I want to do is just cover all the top 20 stats. That's the only thing I really want to cover, and the reason that I want to do this is to kind of talk about, you know, what matters and what doesn't matter when it comes to this tournament, or just any tournament in general. So if we go to off the tee and I go top to bottom, well, you know what I need to do? Freeze up to that column so you can see the position. So if we go top to bottom for off the tee, all your best golfers here, basically kind of what I was doing with the SweetSpot Score, comparing, you know, top 10 finishes to missed cuts. We have 1, 2, 3 top 10 finishes, and we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So if someone was saying off the tee matters more than another stat, you're probably looking at the top 20, you know, heading into this tournament, and you're selecting from this group of golfers. Sure, we have 2 that went inside the top 10, and also inside the optimal lineup, but are you looking at the $6,900 and the $7,300 golfer, or are you selecting the 10-8, 11, 10-2 golfer to start your lineups with? So off the tee, I don't know. That's not that important. Now approach, this is crazy. This is the first that I've seen a tournament like this where we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 optimal lineup golfers in approach. So approach this year mattered. And I can already tell you there are more top 10s than there are missed cuts. So that is actually a good stat to go by. How about around the green? 3 of our golfers inside the optimal lineup are inside the top 20 of these stats. And again, I'm only looking at the top 20 of each category here, which is interesting. So like we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 golfers inside the top 10 in this column. Top 10 finish at this tournament that are top 20 of that category. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 missed cuts. So around the green, you could even say, is a more important stat than, say, off the tee. And putting, we have 1, 2, 3 guys inside the top 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 golfers that missed the cut. So this stat, not the greatest. We can see Xander Schauffele up there, but all overall, putting, going by putting didn't matter. But approach, that was impressive. That's the first time I've ever seen that. So I'm definitely going to have to keep that in the memory banks for next year. Well, let's do this. Filter by condition, everything greater than 0. That leaves our pool down to how many golfers? We have 54 out of 89. So, okay, that's not terrible. I want to get rid of all the 5s and 6s. So let's get rid of all the 5s. I don't know how that brings us down. Not many. I'm actually going to get rid of the 5s. I'm going to get rid of all of the 5s. I know Jordan Spieth is here, so I'm just going to keep that in my memory banks. But if I get rid of all of the 5s, for all the other stats for the buckets, let's see what this leaves us to. Some reason I went up in golfers. How is that possible? Oh, this is some. I'm looking at some for whatever reason. We're down to 34 golfers to select from that we can choose from. So that's not a bad way to get rid of some golfers. So approach and then everything else that I just went through. That's not terrible. Okay, so I don't think I really have anything else to cover. I like going over these stats just to show you that you shouldn't be anchoring any of your lineup creation based off of one single stroke gain stat. One other thing I didn't go over is the bent grass stats. So if I were to go and select your best golfers of bent grass, I mean, we have 5 golfers here in the optimal lineup that are up there. So yeah, bentgrass, definitely a stat to look at. That was a good stat to go by. One of my rules is never to select anyone that's under 5%, of a particular grass. Robert McIntyre, really close, but that remains true. Nobody finished inside the top 10 that was here. I mean, that's only, 12 golfers. So you could get rid of 12 this way. But I'm guessing we could get rid of them looking at strokes gain stats and stuff like that. So that wasn't terrible. I mean, bentgrass stats, definitely a good thing. Course history, we kind of already went over that with the buckets. So no need to talk about that. And I have nothing else. So with that, it's not a terrible time to end this video. 45 minutes in. I want to know how you guys did. So tell me in the comment section. Also with the one segment, if you didn't care too much for that, I want to know. But I want to know how you guys did, especially those that got the optimizer. Tell me what your experience was. Obviously, I think with some of you guys, we already talked through email. There's some understanding that needs to get done with that moving forward. But if you did do well and have any insight to provide, please let me know. But with that, I'm going to bid adieu. Thank you guys for watching. Please leave a like, comment, subscribe, all that good stuff, and I'll see you in the next one. All right, bye.